In Week 1, the New York Guardians looked unstoppable. Matt McGloin looked like a new man. The defense was playing lights out, especially in the red zone, and allowed just 3 points to Tampa Bay. Outside of DC, you could have made the argument that the Guardians were the best team in the XFL after 1 week. And so, everyone was looking at the Week 2 matchup between the Defenders and the Guardians as the game of the week. This was going to tell us a lot more about both of these teams and potential Eastern rivals. In Week 1, the Guardians looked unstoppable. In Week 2, yeah, not so much. The game was an absolute embarrassment for New York. Matt McGloin got benched and had a passer rating of 10.1. The Guardians had 5 first downs the entire game. That's it. New York went 1 for 11 on 3rd down. They lost the net yardage battle 384 to 137. They turned it over 3 times. They averaged only 2.9 yards per play. They completed less than 50% of their passes. Nothing about this game from an offensive perspective was any good for the Guardians, as they lost 27-0 to what has to be the best team in the XFL at this point, although Houston might have something to say about that. But the most eye-popping thing that the Guardians did on Saturday is what they didn't do, and that's score. They put up 0 points. They got shut out. They laid a goose egg. However you want to slice it, they looked awful. It was the first shutout in the history of the brand new XFL. New York made history in all the worst ways possible. Still, the Guardians are 1-1. 2 teams in each division make the playoffs, and considering that the other 2 teams in the division are St. Louis and Tampa Bay, the Guardians still might be looking good. But in this sample size of 2 games, which one should we put more weight on? Should we think that the real Guardians are the ones that dominated the Tampa Bay Vipers and looked unstoppable in Week 1? Or should we think that the real Guardians are the ones that got annihilated by the DC Defenders and couldn't score in Week 2? Just how predictive are shutouts of a team's future success? Let's take a look. Spoiler alert, the Guardians are in trouble. What I wanted to do to find out was exactly what I did last week when I looked at the Tampa Bay Vipers. If you want to see why the Vipers are in serious trouble for the rest of the season, and has nothing to do with Mark Tresman, check that video out in the upper right corner. I looked at every single major upstart football league in their first season. This is the All-American Football Conference in 1946, the American Football League in 1960, the World Football League in 1974, the United States Football League in 1983, the World League of American Football, which later became known as NFL Europe, in 1991, the original XFL in 2001, the United Football League in 2009, and the unfortunately short-lived Alliance of American Football in 2019. With these 8 leagues, I looked at their inaugural season. I looked at the scores from the first 2 weeks of the season. I looked at only the instances of a team getting shut out in those first 2 weeks. Then, of those teams that got shut out in the first 2 weeks, I looked at how they did the rest of the season. Not to give anything away right off the bat, but it's not pretty. There were 7 instances across these 8 leagues of a team getting shut out inside the first 2 weeks of the season. This wound up not applying to the American Football League, the World League of American Football, or the United Football League. Every team in those leagues at least displayed some shred of offensive competency over the first 2 weeks of the season. So with that in mind, let's break down the 7 teams, keeping in mind that there may be some overlap between the teams here and the teams that I mentioned last week in the Vipers video. It starts in 1946 in the All-American Football Conference with the Miami Seahawks, who lost 44-0 in their Week 1 matchup against the Cleveland Browns. To say that this game was a train wreck for Miami would be an understatement. They picked up 5 first downs the entire game. They had 27 yards of total offense, they turned the ball over 4 times, and they actually had -1 yards rushing. Would things get any better for Miami? Nope, not at all. They finished the season with a 3-11 record, finishing dead last in the AAFC, and they even got shut out in back-to-back weeks at one point. Jumping ahead to the Houston Texans of the World Football League, who lost 17-0 in their opening game against the Chicago Fire. As I mentioned in the last video, this season was an absolute dumpster fire. They moved to Shreveport in the middle of the season and became the Shreveport Steamer. And on the field, things weren't much better either. They lost 5 straight games during September, and from August to September, in that 9-game stretch, had just 1 win. the Houston Shreveport team finished dead last in the Western Division with a record of 7-12-1. And yes, somehow, the WFL thought that it would be a smart idea to play 20 regular season games in their first season. Genius financial move. Now, we stay in the WFL, as during that same season, we had a situation very similar to what happened with the Guardians this year. Enter the Philadelphia Bell. In their first game of the 1974 season, they destroyed the Portland Storm by a final score of 33-8. They even brought over 55,000 fans to JFK Stadium for their debut, which was a completely legitimate number and shouldn't be questioned in any way whatsoever.
There were 56,000 people in the first game in Philadelphia. What no one knew until later was only 5,000 actually paid to get in.
We got to the game and the stands are packed. And I remember telling my wife, Patty, oh, this is great. We made the right decision.
I had my picture on the cover of the program. And I looked at my wife at the time. I said, I'll never have to prove myself again.
Then afterwards, we found out that they gave away the tickets at supermarkets.
And the following week, they went up against the Houston Texans. Yes, that same Houston team that lost their opening game 17-0. It looked good on paper for Philadelphia, right? Turns out, not so much. They got shut out 11-0. So you had a team that looked great offensively in week 1 and looked awful offensively in week 2 and couldn't score any points. Which one would truly show which Philadelphia team was the real one? It was option 2. They finished the regular season with a 9-11 record, with one of those 9 wins coming with a forfeit. Amazingly enough, they made the playoffs, even though they didn't. Yeah, the WFL was weird. Basically, the top 2 teams in each division qualified, and Philadelphia was 3rd behind the Charlotte Hornets at 10-10. However, because the Hornets were in debt, and because advanced ticket sales for the game were poor, the league just decided to replace the Hornets with the Bell in the playoffs. Imagine the NFL if Roger Goodell just decided he didn't want the Eagles representing the NFC East, so he just replaced them in the playoffs with the Cowboys. That's kind of what this was like. The Bell lost their playoff game that they didn't even deserve to make. That's a lot. So let's move on to a less bizarre situation, switching gears to the USFL from 1983. The Arizona Wranglers lost their first game against the Oakland Invaders by a final score of 24-0. And things did not get better for the Wranglers throughout the rest of the season. They finished dead last in the Pacific Division with a 4-14 record, finishing tied with the Washington Federals for the worst record in the league, and they ended their season on a 10-game losing streak. And now we stay in the USFL with the New Jersey Generals. In 1983, the Generals did not get off to a good start as well. After losing their first game to the LA Express, they had a Week 2 matchup against the Philadelphia Stars. Safe to say, it did not go well. The Generals lost the game 25-0. New Jersey would not get any better throughout the rest of the season, as they started off 0-4, finished the season with a 6-12 record, and they missed the postseason. Let's stay with the team that plays at the Meadowlands and go to the original XFL from 2001. Yes, this seems to be a common theme amongst the teams that play in Jersey. They will get shut out early on in their inaugural season. In Week 1, the New York-New Jersey Hitmen lost 19-0 in the inaugural XFL game against the Las Vegas Outlaws. The Hitmen went 1-for-11 on 3rd down and 0-for-3 on 4th down. And they threw 2 interceptions and they coughed the ball up 3 times. Not hard to see why they lost with stats like that, and it's not hard to see why they couldn't score any points. Things did not get better for the Hitmen, as they finished the season outside of the postseason with a record of 4-6. Finally, we move over to the Alliance of American Football for the very first game held by the Memphis Express. I think it says somewhere in the 10 Commandments that thou shalt not have a good offense if thy is being led by Christian Hackenberg at quarterback. Sure enough, that was the case here, as the Express lost 26-0 to the Birmingham Iron in the opening week of the season. The Express completed less than 50% of their passes in this one, and the team went 2-for-10 on 3rd down. You're not going to win too many games or score too many points with those numbers. And sure enough, things did not get much better for the Express, who finished 2-6 and were eliminated from the postseason before the entire league wound up getting eliminated from the postseason 2 weeks before the scheduled conclusion of the season. Long live the AAF. So that's 7 teams who got shut out at one point in the first 2 weeks of the season, excluding the Guardians this year. Of those 7 teams, all 7 of them finished with a losing record. The combined winning percentage of these teams was merely 32.8%, which comes out to a 5-11 season in the NFL. Only one of these 7 teams made the postseason, and there is a giant asterisk next to that because the Philadelphia Bell got in because a team forfeited, and then another team was so financially in trouble that they dropped out. Assuming financial stability, none of the 7 teams mentioned made the postseason. Might things be different this year in the XFL for the Guardians? It's possible. Their division does not look too strong outside of DC, and again, we've got a sample size of 2 games to work with, and both games are on polar opposite ends of the spectrum. But let's just say that history is not on New York's side here. Teams in a brand new league that get shut out within the first 2 weeks of the inaugural season do not fare well. Only time will tell to see if the Guardians are any different from the rest.